And I was trying to explain one thing here. The question was, okay, now we understand as a result of specialization and trade, the Tom's PPF rotates out this way, and Judy's PPF rotates out this way. Okay? But the question there was if the maximum number of apples that Tom can produce was only 20, right? And then, Tom specializes in apple, Judy specializes in cherries, right? And then how can 40 apples be available to Judy, right? We're saying this any combination on this red dotted line or below are attainable to Judy, right? And yes, on Tuesday I tried to explain it using the concept of, flow measurement and stock measurement. Okay? So assuming that Tom had some apples stored in the warehouse previously, right? Because this 20 apples is a flow concept, right? So what we're talking about here is Tom can produce 20 pounds of apples per day, right? So perhaps if Tom had a lot of apple already picked and stored in the warehouse, right? Then that could be provided to Judy, right? So that Judy could consume 40 pounds of apple, right? Another possibility there is this, right? So we can also think this way, right? So because of that maximum capacity of 20 here, so what we can think is this. Certainly this combination is possible. In other words, Judy can produce 60 cherries, okay, and consume the 60 pounds of cherries herself, right, without trade, right? Or she can trade any combination, trade and be at any combination on this line, right? For example, she could provide 15, or let's say 50 here, which means that she provides, let's say 15. So let's say 45 here, right? And remember, the terms of trade between Tom and Judy was 1 apple to 1.5 C, right? Or that means a 2/3 apple to 1 C, right? So if Judy provided 15 cherries to Tom, right? And that means that would mean Judy can receive 10 apples, right? So if this is 15, that's going to be 10, right? So Judy will be right here, 45 cherries and 10 apples, right? You understand, right? Or she can be here, for example, if she provides 30 cherries to Tom, right? Then in return, Judy will receive 20 apples, right? So this was 30 cherries and 20 apples, right? But that's the maximum. In other words, the PPF will end right there, because the maximum number of apples Tom can provide to Judy is 20, right? Which means this. So as a result of trade, yes, there is a benefit. Judy will enjoy any combination between this red dotted line and blue line in here, right? So, this, if we make this area shaded, right? That any combination in that shaded area was previously unattainable to Judy, but they are now attainable to Judy as a result of trade, right? But it will end right there. In other words, this area would not be available to Judy, right? Because Tom's capacity is only 20, right? Do you understand? Well, what if Judy really wants to consume more than 20 apples? What can she do?
She can find somebody else who produces.
That's right, exactly, right? So if she can find another trading partner, right, like Tom, right, who has competitive advantage in apple, right, and if she can trade with another person, let's say Jack, right, there's another person, Jack, right, who produces apple, and then certainly then she can bring the entire area under the red dotted line, right, into her consumption possibility, right? So think about international trade. Let's say this is country A, this is country B, right? And apparently country A is perhaps smaller country, right? And they have limited capacity of producing something, right? But country B is a huge country, lots of people, and they need to import a lot of apples, right, to have a sufficient amount of apple for their citizen, right? Then, well, this country can find another trading partner, another country that can supply apple, right? So, they can bring the entire area under the red dotted line into their production possibility or consumption possibility. All right, makes sense? Okay. So you can understand it that way. Right. Let me know if you still have any question about that. Okay. All right, any question from chapter 1 and 2? Or question from the My Econ Lab? Everything all right? Is it working fine? Okay. All right, let's get into chapter 3 today then. The most important chapter in the entire semester. Okay? And maybe I'll say that in every chapter. Right? So chapter 3 is about the invisible hand. Right? Well, first of all, there's a joke here, right? Someone said that you can make even a parrot an economist if you can teach the parrot 2 words, right? Can you guess which are those 2 words? If you can teach a parrot 2 words, then that parrot can be an economist. Eh? What words? Not quite. Really? No idea? Oh, come on, guys. What is this chapter about?
Demand and supply.
Supply and demand, or demand and supply, right? So the point of this joke is, well, economists, they try to explain everything using the concepts of demand and supply, and in fact, they can explain everything based on demand and supply, everything in our life. Why you can find a boyfriend, why you can find a spouse, right? Can get married, right? Even that you can explain. I mean, the economists try to explain using this concept of supply and demand. Yes? Right? Something like that, right? Last class we talked about the Adam Smith book, right? Wealth of Nations, right? And in that book, Adam Smith said, well, contrary to what people believed at that time, I mean, people thought the wealth of nations could be measured by amount of gold and silver, right? And then in order to increase the wealth of nation, there has to be some planning and the control, right? So they considered monopoly is good, and whatever makes it easier to collect taxes by the government, right? That's the good thing, right? That's the general thought at that time. But Adam Smith said, well, if only controls, if only those regulations and controls are lifted, right, then all the individual, everybody in the economy would employ himself or herself in the area where they perform the best, right? In other words, everybody will try to make himself or herself better off, right? And how do you do that? Well, you have to find something that you do well, right? You excel, right? Whether it's a tailor or teacher or musician, whatever, right? Then people asked at that time, right? Well, you say let everyone do whatever they want to do, right? Then what happens if everybody wants to become a tailor? Right? What happens if everybody wants to grow chicken? When we have too many eggs produced in the economy, right? Don't we need to make some plans, and don't we need to make some, the control, right? Considering, the amount of things that people need, right? Well, Adam Smith's answer was not to worry, right? Everything will work out perfectly. We're not going to have too many eggs. We're not going to have too many tailors, right? Because there is something called invisible hand. Right? Something will control. Something will work automatically, right? And we're going to get the best result, right? So, what do you think he had in mind when he said invisible hand? How does it work? Invisible hand? Any idea? Well, we think Adam Smith had the exactly demand and supply in mind, right? So in this chapter, we're going to learn how in a free market economy, right? Everything works out perfectly. In fact, we're going to achieve the best, or what we call optimal result, okay? When nobody controls the economy, right? Just let market work, right? Let market do whatever it wants to do. In other words, when we say market, we mean consumers and producers, right? So, consumers demand things, the producers supply things, right? So when we just let the demand and supply interact in the market freely without any control, right? We think perfect result will be achieved, right? That's the idea, right? Alfred Marshall was the 19th century British economist, right? And of course, he made a lot of contribution to economics, right? Adam Smith provided the ideology of the free market, right? But the many other economists after Adam Smith, right? They came up with the more exact, specific answers how it's going to work, right? So something like marginal analysis. Yeah? You will learn about marginal analysis. It's a very important concept in economics, right? So in most cases, what matters is marginal amount rather than total amount. Okay? And also, Alfred Marshall introduced the concept of the consumer surplus and elasticity, right? So you will see, we will learn about all these concepts later. Okay? He said, well, every short statement about economics is misleading. with a possible exception of this one. Okay? So he's saying, well, yeah, of course, demand and supply are important concepts, right? But of course, you cannot explain everything, right, using demand and supply, right? I'm sure the economics requires something else than the demand and supply. Right? So we'll talk about things like that. Why economics is not so simple. Okay? Why can't you can make just one short statement correct about the economics? Right? Okay, so we'll have to first learn a few terminologies. What we call demand schedule is a table, basically a table which shows the relationship between prices and quantity demanded. Right? So in this table we have price of smartphones, and on the right hand side we have quantities demanded for smartphones, right? So we're saying, well, based on our experience, as a result of collection of data, we know if they charge $300 per each smartphone, there would be 8 million smartphones demanded in the market, or in other words, sold in the market, right? So the quantity demanded, what we mean by quantity demanded, is the amount of goods or services that consumer is willing and able to purchase at a given price, right? So at each of these prices, right, there will be a certain amount of quantity that we will find in the market, how many units the consumers are willing and able to purchase, right? Willing and able is a very important phrase. Okay? In other words, demand is different from desire. Right? Demand is different from desire. Right? People may desire lots of things, and people may want lots of things. But if people do not have ability to pay for it, in other words, if you don't have any money, right, then no matter how much you desire, how much you want, there is no way you can convey your desire and wants to the market, right? So demand requires not only the desire but also the ability to pay, right? Make sure you understand that. Right? Okay, so if you look at this relationship, right, ultimately what we're going to get to is this. Okay? We can have demand schedule, which is a table, right? So you can express or you can describe the relationship between price and quantity demanded in tabular format like that, right, in table. Or you can describe exactly the same relationship using a graph, okay? Like the right-hand side here, right? So we put prices on the vertical axis and quantity demanded on the horizontal axis, right? And so, here we have this pair, $300 and 8 million units, right? So on this space, that becomes a dot right here, right? That's the combination of $300 and 8 million units, right? And then each of the rest pairs or relationship become these dots, right? So we're going to have 5 dots in this space, right? And when you connect these 5 dots, we're going to have this downward sloping line or curve, right? It doesn't have to be a line. In reality, that may be a curvature or curve, right? So the direction of relationship is very important here, right? As you see from the table, from the demand schedule, when you lower the price, what happens to the quantity demanded? it increases, right? So there is an opposite relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Whenever you lower the price, quantity demanded increases, right? So that's what we call either a negative relationship in mathematics, right? In mathematics, if you have line like this, right? Let's say y, x, right? What does that imply? What that means is if x increases, what happens to y? Decreases, right? Because we have this and this, right? So from x1 to x2, if x value increases, what happens is we move from point A to point B, which means y value decreases, right? y1 to y2, right? And we call it negative relationship or inverse relationship, okay? If the line is downward sloping, right? And that's exactly what we have in the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay? So that's what we call actually law of demand. Okay? It's not really law. I mean, nobody made this law, right? But this is just something that we discover in our life, in this world, right? So this is more of an observation rather than law, right? But, you know, it's just a regularity. When we say law, I guess it means regularity. We just observe it every time without exception, right? So that's why we call it law. Yeah? And law of demand says if the price of a product falls, the quantity demanded of the product increases. Vice versa. In other words, if the product price increases, the quantity demanded will decrease, right? That's the law of demand, right? So, law of demand requires the demand curve to be what? Because of the law of demand curve will be downward sloping, right? Or negatively sloped, right? It's the same thing, right? Stating that what? When the price goes up, quantity goes down. Price goes down, quantity goes up. The same thing as expressing the relationship using downward sloping demand curve, right? Okay, so that's the relationship, right? But before you say that, in order to make that statement, we have to do something. In other words, we have to make some assumption. Right? What kind of assumption is required? If you say, every time we raise the price, quantity demanded goes down. Is that true? Why not?
Something like necessities, like something that we have to buy regardless of
okay. All right, so let's say compared to the last month, this month, first of all, we are simplifying here. Right? Of course, there are many different brands of smartphones, right? And many different types of smartphone, right? But let's simplify this and say, let's say there's only one kind of smartphone. Every smartphone is the same, right? And we simply lowered the price of smartphone compared to the last month, right? And does that mean the quantity demanded for smartphone will increase without exception? No? Why not? Isn't it natural? I mean, if the price is lower, people will buy more What can go wrong there? Huh?
Not many people need.
Okay.
I mean,
You mean everybody already bought smartphone?
if everyone has already bought
Mm.
smartphones,
Mm-hmm.
then
Even if you lower the price, right? It's not going to increase, right? Quantity demanded. Or what?
Product is necessary.
Product, okay?
If product is necessary, then we have to have.
Mm-hmm.
Then if the price is decreasing,
Mm-hmm.
we'll have to buy.
Ah, okay. So you're talking about the opposite case. What if price went up, right? I mean, based on the law of demand, we would predict the quantity demanded will go down, right? But if the product is really necessary, everybody has to have smartphone, right? Then the price will not really affect the quantity demanded. Or the same context, perhaps let's say February is graduation month. All the high school graduates in February, right? And a lot of parents may buy new smartphones to their children who graduate high school, right, as the present, right? Then, even when the price goes up, right, the quantity demanded may actually increase, right? Something like that, right? So the idea there is, well, in science, if you want to make any statement, if you want to make any conclusion about the relationship between two variables, let's say x and y, right? Right? Then you need a statement or assumption, right? Ceteris paribus. Okay? Ceteris paribus is a Latin phrase. Okay? Ceteris means other, right? Or else, right? So many times you see the ETC, right? I say apple, banana, oranges, ETC. What does ETC mean? Huh? Etc., right? Etc. Etc. Right? Or and so on, right? And other things. Okay? So ceteris means other things or something else, right? Paribus means equal, right? So other things equal, or holding other things equal, other things being equal, right? That's what ceteris paribus means, right? In science, when you try to analyze the relationship between x and y, if you want to make a conclusion about the relation between x and y, you have to have this statement, ceteris paribus, before you make any conclusion, right? Think about it. Let's say you are growing tomatoes in your backyard. Okay? And you want to find out the relationship between the amount of fertilizer you use and the amount of tomatoes you harvest. Right? So let's say last 20 years you have grown tomatoes, right? And you have tried different amount of fertilizer, right? And you recorded all this, the amount of different amount of fertilizer, and then how many pounds of tomatoes you harvested, right? And based on this, you want to make a conclusion saying, well, every time I use the 1 additional ounce of fertilizer, I was able to collect, say, 2.5 pounds additional tomato, right? Would that be accurate conclusion? So can you say if you use 1 ounce of additional amount of fertilizer, you can expect 2.5 pounds of additional tomatoes. Would that be accurate? You've done this in the exercise, right? In the My Econ lab, right? What can be wrong there? What can be the problem there?
There might be other variables.
There might be other variable, right? Missing variable problem, right? So, yeah, think about it. In addition to fertilizer, right, there are lots of factors that can affect the tomato growth, right? Weather, I mean, temperature, the amount of rain, right? Amount of sunshine, right? Quality of the soil, right? Or kind of plant disease, right? What kind of plant disease was there each year, and so on. There are many, many other factors, right? What kind of tomato seed did you use? Something like that, right? So if you want to make a conclusion about the relationship between two variables, or you want to make a conclusion about the effect of X on Y, right? You have to assume that all other things remain constant, right? That's the idea of ceteris paribus. Right? So here, going back to the supply and demand, the relation between price and quantity demanded. Let's say this is price, quantity demanded. Right? It's a suppose you are running a business, right? And you want to find out the effect of price on your sales. Okay? So quantity sold as a function of, let's say, price. Okay? And suppose you collected this information on many years, right? Suppose this is quarterly sales and the price you charged every quarter, right? So you collected the information on different prices that you charged and quantity sold, right? So, once the purpose of finding this relationship is what? You can make a prediction, right? If you want to, if you charge a certain price, you can expect, that much sales in your business, right? Right? Or if your sales goal is a certain amount, what the price you should use, something like that, right? But is the price the only factor of quantities sold? If you just use price to make a prediction on sales, right? Would that be accurate?
No.
What else is there? What else can affect your sales? Design? Okay, well, design or quality, let's say, right? So let's say quality of the product certainly matters, right? What else? Issue? What do you mean issue?
If famous actor, actress use the product, some people.
Oh, okay. Are you talking about advertisement?
Yeah.
Marketing? Okay, good, yeah. Let's say advertisement, right? So how much money you spend on advertisement every quarter, that may certainly affect the sales, right? What else? Huh? Red? Brand? What do you mean? It's yours, right? You're selling. Oh, okay. So you're talking about different brand, right? Let's say we are talking about your own brand. Yeah, you're selling your own brand. Right? Would there be anything else that matter?
if there is another
competition.
company, yeah, if there is a competition, it's going to affect.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, suppose there is a competition, and how much price they charge. So this is your own price. There is maybe your competition, right? How much price that your competition charges, right? That may affect your sales, right? Like, what about weather? I mean, you can control your quality. You can control, how much money you spend in advertisement. But there are certain things that you cannot control, like weather. Suppose you're selling, whatever, apparel or soft drink, right? Then weather may be a very important factor, right? Depending on whether it's a hot summer or not very hot summer, right? If it's a really hot summer and you're selling soft drink, right? Then of course that's going to increase your sales, right? And so on, right? So first of all, if you want to find out the relationship between the price you charge and how many units you sell, you have to assume that all other things remain constant, right? Because depending on other factors, the sales will be affected, right? I'm digressing a little bit, right? But this is an important, interesting concept, right? In natural science, you can actually control. You don't have to assume. You can actually control, right? And that's what they do in lab. I mean, in the pharmaceutical company, when they develop a new drugs, right? They do a lot of experiments in the lab, right? So, for example, if you're trying to find the relationship between fertilizer and tomato crop, tomato harvest, right? You can have many lots of the same size, right? And you can actually control all the amount of water you give, amount of sunshine you let in, the temperature, humidity, and quality of soil, and of course you can use the same species of tomato seed, right? And you just change the amount, make the amount of fertilizer, right, differ across the units, right? Then, yes, you can find the effect of fertilizer because you have controlled all other factors precisely. Okay? That's what they do in natural science, in experiment, right? In social science, like economics, right? You can't do that. You cannot do that. Why? You don't know what? Why not? I mean, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to predict, well, if we raise the price by 2%, what's going to happen to sales? But what? Yeah, the idea is in social science, the subject is people, human, right? So you cannot put, people in this, different cells, okay, and try to control exactly, all the environment. These days, I mean, there's a lot of people are even against using animals like rats, right, as a subject of experiment, right? So there's no way you can put the human into this experiment, right? So then how? I mean, is there any way we can find the relationship between price and quantity? If you cannot observe in the human behavior, right, in a controlled environment. Yeah? Any idea?
You can study history.
History, okay. Okay, so let's say, of course, you will need a lot of data, the historical prices and historical quantity supplied, and of course, how much money you spent on your advertisement in each quarter, and of course about weather, something like temperature and amount of rain or whatever, right? Of course, there are many other factors like economy, right? How was the economy, right? Inflation rate, unemployment rate, you know. Okay? So that's a good idea. You have to look at the history, of course. In other words, you have to have the data, right? And then how? How do you use the data to derive this relationship? It's, you know, it's a very interesting question. How do we have controlled environment so that, in other words, how do we have that ceteris paribus condition so that we can make a conclusion about the relationship between only two variables that we are interested in, right? Is there any way? Is it ever possible in social science? Yeah? And the answer is yes. There is an amazing technique and tool that we use to use in social science. Okay? It's called regression analysis. Regression analysis. Right? Have you ever heard of it? Yeah? In Korean language, it's called the 회귀 분석. Right? And you will learn about this in econometrics course. Right? So I think most of you are freshmen, right? So next semester you will learn, probably take the economic statistics. Right? That will provide some background for this regression analysis. Right? We used to have introduction to econometrics, but we don't have it anymore. So you will just directly go into econometrics course, right? And in econometrics, you will learn the regression analysis, right? And let me give you just a very simple example of regression analysis. Something like this, right? You can have the quantity sold as the dependent variable and all other as your independent variable, including the price, right? In my example, I'm a labor economist, right? So most of my research uses wage or earning, somebody's earning as the dependent variable. Right? And I'm trying to explain what factors determine somebody's wage. And of course, there may be some key variable like this. In this case, you're trying to explain what determines your sales, okay? But your focus is on price, right? What happens if you change the price, right? You're trying to find the relationship, right? Holding other things constant, right? So in my case, let's say I can have schooling. So my key interest is the relationship between the education, someone's education, and the person's labor market earning, right? But in order to find the relationship between the schooling and earning, I have to control all other things constant, right? So equation becomes 12 beta 2 times, say, experience, how many years of labor market experience the person has, plus the person's, say, gender or sex, and the person's occupation, the person's region, what region the person works, and so on. Okay? Typically, about in typical case, I have about 10 to 20 different independent variables, right? And based on the data, I would estimate this equation, right? That's what regression analysis is about, right? So simple regression analysis is this, right? Say we have amount of wages and years of schooling, right? So I have, say, 100 people in my data, right? So first person, say Bob, has 12 years of schooling, which is what, high school graduate, right? And his wage is, say, $3.50 per hour, right? Another person, Jack, has 14 years of schooling, so junior college graduate, right? And his wage is what, $3.75 per hour, right? Another person, 16 years of schooling, which is college graduate, right? And he earns whatever, $4.15 per hour, right? So if I have 100 people in my data, I'm going to have this 100 dots. Okay? Regression analysis means line fitting. Line fitting. That's what regression analysis is. Regression is very interesting name. Because regression, when we say regression analysis, has nothing to do with this line fitting, right? But because there's an interesting story. This regression analysis was developed by a biologist. Okay? The person was interested in father's height and son's height. Okay? So he was trying to find out, children resemble their parents, right? So what's the relationship between a father's height and son's height, right? If father's tall, right, then will the son will be also tall, right? So he collected this data on father's height and son's height, right? And of course, he found the mathematical way, right, to find the best fitting line, right? To find the best fitting line. Finding the best fitting line, that's regression analysis, right? So if you have data like this, right, which line is the best fitting line? And of course, what do we mean by best fitting, right? The best fitting means you have to minimize the error, right? Because when you find this line, right, you're going to use, in most cases in business purpose, right, you're going to be using this equation to make a prediction or forecast, right? So let's say this y was, whatever, 2 plus 2.5x, right? Suppose this is y, this was x, right? So if you found the equation of the best fitting line, then you can use this equation to make the prediction, right? So if you, let's say x value was 14, right? Then what's going to be the predicted amount of y, right? Yeah, so let's say in my case, right, I came up with whatever, let's say 1.5 plus 1.1 as, let's say this was 1.5, 1.1, and let's say this came up with 2.0, and this came up with negative 0.8, something like that. Yeah? Based on the data, I estimated this equation, right? Then, what is the interpretation of this result, right? So, what that means is this, right? Holding other things constant. In other words, if we hold experience, sex, occupation, region, and all other variables constant, right? Then what we can say is every time schooling increases by 1 unit, in other words, every time a person acquires 1 additional year of schooling, right? The wage, the person's wage will increase by $1.50. Oh, sorry, that's an intercept. $1.10. Right? You understand? Think about it. Suppose there are 2 people, right? And 2 people are exactly the same. Okay? Same number of years of experience, same sex, same occupation, same region. But first person has 13 years of schooling. Second person has 14 years of schooling, right? What would be the difference in their wages? If 2 people have exactly same experience, sex, occupation, region, right? But the only difference is the amount of schooling by 1 year, right? Then the second person's wage will be what? $1.10 higher than the first person's wage, right? Make sense, right? So you can do exactly that. I mean the ceteris paribus, right? The interpretation of this coefficient is holding other things constant. Holding other things constant, right? Effect of schooling on the wage is exactly $1.10, right? Every time schooling increases by 1 unit, right? That's a beautiful thing, right? So I'm just giving you some the kind of preview, okay, of what you're going to learn during the next 4 years, right? This regression analysis. Without regression analysis, our world will not exist right now. Because, as I said, this regression analysis was developed in biology. So all the medical science, medical research is based on regression analysis. Of course, all the physics, I mean, without regression analysis, the physics will not exist, right? When you shoot the rocket to the moon, to, somewhere in the universe, right? You have to use regression analysis. Of course, business, marketing, everywhere, economics, right? Social science, sociology, right? History, everybody uses regression analysis. I heard even music these days. Okay? In the field of music, they use regression analysis. I don't know exactly how they use regression analysis to, in music field, right? So, yeah, that's the most important, most useful, powerful technique, right? All right, so that's the idea of ceteris paribus, right? And how do we apply the ceteris paribus condition in social science? We can do that using regression analysis, okay? All right, so make sure you understand the concept there. And all right, so next slide. What is it? What is the substitution effect? I think my copy you should have one page with the substitution. What explains the law of demand? Do you have that page? Slide number 5. Yeah? Somehow sorry. I guess I brought the wrong version. Yeah. So look at the slide number 5. Okay? What explains the law of demand? Yeah? Disregard this. I'm not talking about this slide. Look at your note. Okay? I don't have that page here. Okay? Substitution effect and income effect, right? So I'm trying to explain why there is law of demand. I mean, why do we see law of demand? Okay? In other words, what's the reason that whenever you raise the price, quantity demanded goes down, vice versa, right? Well, substitution effect means if the price of something becomes cheaper, I mean, when the price comes down, right, then compared to other things, that particular product becomes relatively cheaper, right? So people may substitute. In the end, as we go on, we will learn the psychology of demand. I mean, what explains the demand? Okay? Why do people use certain amount of money to purchase certain things in certain quantity, right? Well, we have to get into people's psychology, right? What makes people purchase certain things, right? In the end, the answer is, of course, satisfaction. People purchase things, people consume things, goods or services, to gain satisfaction, right? In economics, we call it utility, right? So we believe everybody tries to maximize utility with the given amount of money they have, right? So if you have a choice between A and B, let's say A is smartphone, B is laptop or notebook computer. Let's say C is a tablet PC, right? Say tablet PC, right? So let's say you've been saving some money to purchase a laptop computer, right? And then suddenly this month they have a sale on smartphone. They have lowered the price of smartphone significantly, right? And well, you may think, well, smartphone can actually do lots of things that, laptop can do, right? In fact, you can work on the My Econ Lab in your smartphone if you want. You don't really need a computer, they say, right? Huh? Really? I don't know. They say that. Yeah. But won't we? I mean, won't it work? I mean, you can access website with a smartphone, right? And you should be able to, yeah? According to what the website says, right? So let's say, okay, well, since it's now much cheaper, right? Why don't I just buy smartphone, right? That's the idea of substitution, right? When the price of one item goes down, right, it makes that item relatively cheaper compared to other items, right? So consumers may substitute, right? So that's one reason, one possible explanation for that relationship. When the price comes down, quantity demanded increases, right? The other explanation is income effect. Okay? Income effect says when things become cheaper, right? Everybody has a certain amount of income, right? And when things become cheaper, that makes the amount of income relatively large. Okay? In other words, with the same amount of income, now consumers can afford more goods and services, right? So it's just like you have an increase in income when the price of things come down, right? It has the same effect of higher income, right? So people can buy more goods and services, right? That's the idea of income effect, right? But right in this course, we're going to just, explain the concept, and it is sufficient to just to understand the concept of substitution effect and income effect. In your next course, in your probably intermediate I think in this college we just call it microeconomics. Right? So introduction to economics, and then there's principles of microeconomics or macroeconomics. Right? In many other schools, they call it intermediate micro and macroeconomics after that, right? But I think in this college we just call it microeconomics or macroeconomics. Right? That's probably the highest level of economics you're going to learn in college. Right? When you take that course, you will be able to exactly calculate the amount of income effect and amount of substitution effect, right? And you should be able to illustrate graphically, right? When let's say x1, x2, right? So the quantity demanded changes from x1 to x2, right? And exactly how much of this is income effect and how much of this is substitution effect, right? You'll be able to do that, right? And it's a very interesting analysis, right? So yeah, that's we explain, right? Explain the change in the consumption behavior using the concept of substitution effect and income effect. Yeah. All right. So let's continue. Let's say so we have demand curve here, right? And I already explained this slide, right? This is one way to express the relationship using the table. That's called the demand schedule. When you express the same idea using the graph, it's called the demand curve, right? And the important thing is demand curve is sloping downward. Yeah? All right, the next topic is the most important concept in this chapter, right? You have to distinguish between the changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded, right? Those two are completely different things, right? Yeah? Changes in demand is completely different thing from change in quantity demanded. Right? Okay, so quantity demanded is pretty simple, right? If the price changes, yeah, we have, let's say, demand curve here, right? Price, quantity, right? If price changes from P0 to P1, right? Then what you're going to have is what? Which one is it? Are you going to have change in demand or change in quantity demanded? Quantity demanded, right? So whenever the price changes, I mean own price, there is own price and other price, right? We're talking about the price of your own product, right? Whatever the product you're talking about here, right? If the price of that product changes, then you're going to see changes in quantity demanded. And here we are assuming ceteris paribus, right? So we're just assuming that everything else remained the same, right? And just only the price changed, right? Then quantity demanded will change, right? But if something else changes here, other than the price, right? Like consumers' income. So compared to last month, this month people have larger income. In the United States, it happens typically in February. Okay? There's what's called tax return. Okay? I think in Korea they do the same thing, right? When does they call it extra month, extra income? You guys have any idea what I'm talking about? What do you call that in Korea? 소득공제, what? Yeah. So what happens is, for most of the working people in the companies withhold taxes every month, right? And then at the end of the year, right, they calculate exact amount based on the total amount of annual income. They calculate the exact amount of tax the person owes, right? And usually what happens is, for safety, companies withhold a little more than the exact amount of taxes the person is supposed to pay, right? So when so usually happens in February, I think in Korea, right? So 연말정산, what they call, right? 연말정산. Yeah? So based on this amount, in the February, either you get some extra pay, right? Yeah. Some people actually pay more, have to pay more if they have not withheld enough taxes. Yeah? But in the United States, they do. It's the same thing happens, but they actually receive check from IRS, the tax department, right? So usually February, March at this time, they get this check from the IRS, so they have some extra money, right? Then suddenly, what? Even if the price was the same, let's say this is the demand for smartphone, right? And usually people get something like $500, or some people get $2,000, check from IRS, right? So, suddenly they have extra money, right? Then, even at the same price, the quantity demanded may be larger, right? Okay? At any price, whatever the price may be, right? So if the price was $50 or $100, at different price, the quantity demanded is larger than before, right? Then it's like we have a new demand curve, right? So this was the original demand curve and the new demand curve, right? This is what we call change in demand rather than change in quantity demanded, right? So we have to understand these two things, the difference between the two things, right? Then we'll be able to go ahead and have the analysis using demand and supply. We'll be able to explain almost everything, right, in economics, right? Any question? We'll continue this chapter on Tuesday. Have a good weekend.